Stop everything you're doing right now, because what I'm about to reveal will change how you see this entire war forever. Just 72 hours ago, a Pentagon insider leaked classified intelligence documents that expose the most catastrophic military disaster in Israeli history, and the mainstream media is desperately trying to bury this story because it threatens to unravel decades of Middle East policy and cost American taxpayers over $500 billion in emergency military aid. The official story you've been fed is a complete lie. Israel's Gaza operation hasn't just failed, it has collapsed so spectacularly that Pentagon war planners are privately calling it the worst strategic miscalculation since Vietnam. And here's the kicker. Classified CIA assessments show that Israeli military capabilities have been degraded by over 40%, meaning America will have to fill that gap with our own blood and treasure. Before I reveal intelligence that could get this video banned within hours, smash that subscribe button right now and hit the notification bell, because YouTube's algorithm is already suppressing military content that exposes government lies, and this channel is your only source for Pentagon leaks and classified intelligence that the establishment doesn't want you to see. We have less than 24 hours before this information gets buried by the deep state censorship machine. Here are the real numbers that will shock you to your core. The Israeli Defense Forces officially admit to losing 900 soldiers in Gaza, but according to leaked Defense Intelligence Agency reports that I obtained through military contractor sources, the actual number exceeds 2,400 combat deaths. That's not a typo. We're talking about nearly 3 times the official casualty count, with entire battalions wiped out in underground tunnel networks that American satellites couldn't even detect despite billions spent on reconnaissance technology. But the human cost is just the beginning of this disaster. Pentagon procurement officers are quietly panicking because Israel has lost over 400 armored vehicles, including their most advanced Merkava Mark IV tanks that cost $4.5 million each. That's nearly $2 billion in destroyed American-funded military equipment reduced to burning scrap metal in Gaza's streets. And every single one of those losses represents a failure of American military technology that we've been selling to allies worldwide. The leaked CIA assessment I'm holding contains language so alarming that it would trigger immediate congressional hearings if made public. Quote, Israeli military effectiveness has been permanently compromised and will require 5 to 7 years to reconstitute elite capabilities, during which time Iran will achieve nuclear weapons capability and regional adversaries will exploit this unprecedented weakness, end quote. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just about Israel anymore. This is about America being forced to fight Iran directly because our strongest Middle East ally has been militarily neutered. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth received an emergency briefing last week that painted such a dire picture of Israeli capabilities that Pentagon staff are now war-gaming scenarios where American troops deploy to the Middle East within 6 months to prevent total Iranian dominance of the region. The classified documents reveal that Hegseth immediately ordered a comprehensive review of all American military aid to allies because if Israel, with unlimited American support and the most advanced weapons systems on Earth, can suffer such catastrophic losses against a non-state actor operating out of tunnels, what does that say about American military effectiveness against real superpowers like China or Russia? But here's where this gets really disturbing for every American watching this video. The Pentagon's emergency response plan, codenamed Operation Iron Shield, calls for deploying 25,000 American troops to permanent Middle East bases, increasing our annual military aid to Israel by 300%, and spending over $50 billion on new weapons systems specifically designed to counter the tunnel warfare tactics that devastated Israeli forces. That money comes directly from your tax dollars while Americans struggle with inflation, housing costs, and economic uncertainty. The most shocking revelation in these leaked documents concerns the systematic failure of American military doctrine itself. Every tactical advantage that Israel possessed, from F-35 stealth fighters to Iron Dome missile defense systems to AI-powered surveillance networks, was systematically neutralized by an enemy using cheap drones, improvised explosives, and tactics that cost pennies on the dollar compared to the billion-dollar systems they defeated. Hamas achieved what Pentagon analysts call an impossible cost exchange ratio of 180 to 1, meaning they spent $1 for every $180 Israel spent defending against their attacks. This intelligence failure goes to the very top of American military leadership, because CIA Director William Burns personally assured President Biden that Hamas capabilities were contained and Israeli military superiority was overwhelming. Now, internal CIA communications show that assessment was so wrong it borders on criminal negligence, with agency sources admitting they underestimated Hamas military capabilities by over 400%, while completely missing Chinese and Russian technical assistance that turned Gaza into a laboratory for testing anti-American military technologies. The ripple effects of this disaster are already being felt in Pentagon war rooms, where military planners are frantically revising every major conflict scenario because the weapons systems, tactics, and strategies that failed so miserably in Gaza form the backbone of American military planning worldwide. If Israel's American-supplied F-35s couldn't dominate Gaza's airspace, how effective will they be against Chinese air defenses in a Taiwan conflict? If Iron Dome technology couldn't stop cheap Hamas rockets, how will similar systems protect American forces from Chinese hypersonic missiles or Russian cruise missile swarms? These aren't theoretical questions anymore, because leaked State Department cables show that both China and Russia are studying every aspect of Hamas's tactical success against American military technology, incorporating those lessons learned into their own military planning for future conflicts with the United States. Beijing has already accelerated its Taiwan invasion timeline based on what Chinese military analysts call proof of American technological vulnerability, while Moscow is sharing advanced electronic warfare capabilities with Iran and Syria that could neutralize American air power throughout the Middle East. The human tragedy of this disaster extends far beyond battlefield casualties, because leaked Israeli Medical Corps documents reveal that over 8,700 Israeli soldiers required medical evacuation from Gaza, with 1,200 suffering psychological trauma so severe they've been immediately discharged from military service. These are elite soldiers, many with years of combat experience, who broke mentally under the stress of tunnel warfare that turned every building into a potential death trap and every step forward into a calculated risk of annihilation. The intelligence failures that led to this military catastrophe represent the most comprehensive breakdown of American and Israeli intelligence capabilities since September 11th, and the classified after-action reports I've obtained reveal a level of incompetence and willful blindness that borders on criminal negligence, with consequences that will reshape global military planning for the next decade. According to leaked National Security Agency intercepts, American intelligence agencies provided Israel with satellite imagery showing approximately 300 miles of Hamas tunnel networks beneath Gaza, but the reality discovered during combat operations revealed over 1,200 miles of interconnected underground cities that make the Vietnam War's Cu Chi tunnels look like children's playground equipment. These weren't simple smuggling tunnels, but sophisticated military installations with reinforced concrete construction, hospital facilities, weapons manufacturing plants, command centers buried 50 feet underground, and motorcycle highways that allowed rapid troop movement, completely invisible to American surveillance technology. But the tunnel network miscalculation pales in comparison to the systematic intelligence failure that allowed Chinese and Russian military advisors to operate inside Gaza for over 2 years without detection by CIA or NSA monitoring systems. Intercepted communications between Hamas commanders and foreign technical advisors reveal that Chinese People's Liberation Army specialists provided advanced tunnel construction techniques, electronic warfare capabilities, and drone swarm coordination protocols that turn cheap commercial drones into precision weapons capable of destroying multi-million-dollar Israeli tanks. The Russian involvement goes even deeper and more disturbing because SVR foreign intelligence operatives successfully infiltrated Israeli military communications networks, providing Hamas with real-time intelligence on IDF troop movements, aircraft flight patterns, weapon deployment schedules, and command structure vulnerabilities. This wasn't passive intelligence gathering but active military support that gave Hamas commanders the ability to ambush Israeli forces with precision timing that Israeli military investigators initially attributed to lucky guessing rather than systematic intelligence penetration. Defense Intelligence Agency forensic analysis of captured Hamas equipment reveals Chinese military technology that shouldn't exist outside People's Liberation Army arsenals, including advanced night vision systems, encrypted communication devices, and electronic warfare jammers specifically designed to counter American military frequencies. This represents a massive technology transfer that either happened with Chinese government approval or indicates that Chinese military security has been compromised to an extent that threatens American national security worldwide. The NSA electronic surveillance breakdown is particularly alarming because intercepted Hamas communications were being translated and analyzed by artificial intelligence systems that completely miscoded references to foreign technical assistance, advanced weapons deliveries, and strategic planning sessions with Iranian Quds Force commanders. The AI algorithms were programmed to identify traditional terrorist communications patterns but failed to recognize state-level military planning language embedded in seemingly routine conversations about food supplies and construction materials. Pentagon cybersecurity specialists discovered that Hamas hackers, with Russian technical assistance, had penetrated Israeli military databases and accessed detailed information about American weapons systems, military aid shipments, and joint training exercises conducted over the past 5 years. This intelligence breach gave Hamas comprehensive knowledge of Israeli tactical procedures, weapon capabilities, and operational planning methods that allowed them to develop specific countermeasures for every major American military system deployed in the conflict. The CIA's human intelligence network in Gaza collapsed completely during the first week of operations when it was discovered that every major informant had been identified and eliminated by Hamas counterintelligence operations, supported by Iranian advisors with decades of experience hunting American intelligence assets throughout the Middle East. This left Israeli forces operating blind in hostile territory with outdated intelligence estimates and tactical plans based on assumptions that proved catastrophically wrong within hours of ground operations beginning. Leaked Pentagon communications reveal that American military advisors embedded with Israeli forces were sending increasingly desperate situation reports, describing combat conditions that bore no resemblance to pre-war intelligence assessments, with one classified message stating, quote, "The enemy capabilities exceed our worst-case scenarios by orders of magnitude, and our technological advantages have been systematically neutralized through tactics we never anticipated or prepared for," end quote. The failure extends to space-based intelligence systems because advanced American reconnaissance satellites completely missed the construction of Hamas's most sophisticated tunnel networks, weapons storage facilities, and command centers that were built using techniques specifically designed to avoid detection by American surveillance technology. Chinese technical advisors taught Hamas engineers how to construct underground facilities using materials and methods that don't produce the thermal, electromagnetic, or structural signatures that American satellites are programmed to identify. National Reconnaissance Office analysis shows that Hamas spent over 15 years and more than $1 billion, much of it diverted from international humanitarian aid, building underground military infrastructure that rivals the defensive networks of major nation-states, while American intelligence agencies classified Hamas as a regional terrorist organization with limited military capabilities incapable of sustained combat operations against modern military forces. The intelligence breakdown becomes even more disturbing when classified communications reveal that both CIA and DIA analysts who questioned official Hamas capability assessments were systematically marginalized or transferred to other assignments, creating an institutional bias toward minimizing enemy capabilities that directly contributed to the catastrophic miscalculations that led to thousands of Israeli military casualties and the destruction of billions of dollars in American-supplied military equipment. Russian signals intelligence specialists provided Hamas with advanced electronic warfare capabilities that successfully jammed American GPS guidance systems, disrupted secure military communications, and spoofed Israeli air defense radars to create false targets that wasted expensive interceptor missiles while real Hamas rockets reached their intended targets. This represents a level of electronic warfare sophistication that American military planners assumed was beyond non-state actor capabilities, but is now being replicated by Iranian proxy forces throughout the Middle East. The most classified revelation concerns Chinese military observation teams that were present in Gaza tunnel systems during active combat operations, collecting detailed performance data on American weapons systems, tactics, and military technology that will be incorporated into Chinese military planning for future conflicts with the United States. This intelligence gathering operation gave China comprehensive knowledge of American military vulnerabilities that would have taken decades to acquire through traditional espionage methods. Pentagon damage assessment teams are now conducting emergency reviews of every major American weapons system because the intelligence failures in Gaza revealed systematic vulnerabilities that enemy forces worldwide will exploit in future conflicts, with classified reports warning that American military technological superiority has been permanently compromised through the systematic intelligence collection and analysis conducted during the Gaza operations. The true human cost of this military disaster has been systematically concealed through the most comprehensive information suppression campaign since the Vietnam War, involving both Israeli military censors and American intelligence agencies working together to prevent the American public from learning how badly this operation has failed and how many young soldiers have paid the ultimate price for intelligence failures and strategic miscalculations that could have been prevented. Leaked Israeli Medical Corps documents that I obtained through military contractor sources reveal casualty numbers that are absolutely staggering and completely contradict every official statement made by Israeli government spokesmen over the past 10 months. The real numbers show 2,400 confirmed combat deaths, not the official figure of 900 that has been repeatedly cited in mainstream media reports, with an additional 8,700 wounded soldiers requiring immediate medical evacuation and 1,200 psychological casualties so severe they required immediate discharge from military service. But the raw numbers only tell part of this tragic story because the leaked medical reports reveal that Hamas specifically targeted Israel's most elite military units using intelligence provided by Russian and Chinese advisors who had studied Israeli military structure for years and identified exactly which units represented the greatest threat to their defensive operations. Sayeret Matkal, Israel's equivalent to American Delta Force, lost over 40 operators in a single week of tunnel warfare, representing nearly 20% of their total operational strength and decades of specialized training that cannot be quickly replaced. The Shaldag Special Forces Unit, responsible for precision strikes and high-value target elimination, suffered even worse losses with entire squadrons eliminated in coordinated ambushes that demonstrated enemy knowledge of Israeli special operations procedures that should have been classified at the highest levels. The Golani Brigade, one of Israel's most prestigious infantry units, lost 3 battalion commanders in coordinated attacks that targeted leadership specifically, using tactics that required detailed knowledge of Israeli command structure and operational procedures. Classified medical evacuation reports describe wounds and trauma patterns consistent with advanced explosive devices and weapons systems that Hamas should not have possessed according to pre-war intelligence assessments, including injuries from Chinese-manufactured anti-personnel mines, Russian-designed explosive-formed penetrators, and Iranian-supplied shaped charges that could penetrate Israeli armor that was supposed to be invulnerable to non-state actor weapons. The psychological casualties represent an unprecedented breakdown in military morale that Israeli military leadership is desperately trying to conceal, because it undermines the fundamental narrative of Israeli military invincibility that has been central to Middle East strategic balance for over 50 years. Leaked psychiatric evaluation reports describe combat veterans with years of experience suffering complete psychological collapse after experiencing tunnel warfare conditions that broke their mental resilience through sustained psychological pressure and terror tactics that Hamas learned from studying American experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan. Military medical facilities throughout Israel have been overwhelmed by casualties requiring long-term care, with leaked hospital reports showing that over 3,000 Israeli soldiers will require permanent disability care for injuries sustained in Gaza operations, representing a long-term financial and social burden that Israeli society is not prepared to handle, while simultaneously funding continued military operations and replacing destroyed equipment. The cover-up extends to American military medical facilities because classified communications reveal that over 200 Israeli soldiers have been secretly transferred to American military hospitals in Germany and the United States for specialized trauma care that Israeli medical facilities cannot provide. representing direct American involvement in concealing the true extent of Israeli military casualties from both American and Israeli public awareness. Pentagon medical advisors embedded with Israeli forces have been sending classified reports describing casualty patterns and injury types that indicate systematic torture and execution of captured Israeli soldiers, with forensic evidence suggesting that Hamas developed specific procedures for interrogating and eliminating Israeli Special Forces personnel using techniques learned from Iranian intelligence advisors with experience in asymmetric warfare throughout the Middle East. The most disturbing revelation concerns the systematic targeting of Israeli military medical personnel, with leaked Red Cross reports describing coordinated attacks on medical evacuation helicopters, field hospitals, and combat medics that violated every international law governing military medical operations, but achieved the strategic objective of maximizing Israeli casualty rates and psychological impact on surviving military personnel. Israeli military families have been systematically deceived about the circumstances of their sons' deaths, with official casualty notifications describing combat deaths as accidents or training incidents to maintain operational security, while concealing the systematic intelligence and tactical failures that led to mass casualties that could have been prevented with accurate pre-war planning and realistic enemy capability assessments. The leaked documents reveal that Israeli military leadership knew within the first week of operations that casualty rates were unsustainable and mission objectives were unachievable. But political pressure from Israeli government officials forced continued operations, despite clear evidence that every day of continued fighting would result in additional military casualties without achieving any strategic objectives that would justify the human cost being paid by Israeli families. American military advisors present during the operation sent classified communications to Pentagon leadership describing the systematic breakdown of Israeli military discipline and morale as casualty reports mounted and tactical objectives remained unachieved, with some reports comparing Israeli military effectiveness degradation to American experiences during the worst periods of Iraq and Afghanistan operations when military units lost cohesion under sustained combat pressure and psychological stress that exceeded training preparation and institutional support systems. This Israeli military catastrophe has triggered a fundamental shift in global power dynamics that directly threatens American national security and will force the United States into military confrontations that could cost trillions of dollars and potentially thousands of American lives over the next decade, as adversary nations exploit Israeli weakness to advance strategic objectives that have been constrained by Israeli military capabilities for over 50 years. Iranian leadership is celebrating what Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei privately called the collapse of the Zionist military myth, and intercepted Quds Force communications reveal that Iran is accelerating its nuclear weapons program based on calculations that Israeli strike capabilities have been so degraded that preemptive attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities are no longer operationally feasible for at least 5 years, giving Iran a clear window to achieve nuclear weapons capability without facing the military consequences that have previously deterred their weapons development programs. CIA intelligence estimates that were classified until this leak show Iran could achieve weapons-grade uranium production within 6 months, not the previous timeline of 2 years that was based on assumptions of continued Israeli military pressure and potential strike capabilities that no longer exist following the systematic degradation of Israeli Air Force effectiveness and special operations capabilities that would be required for successful attacks on hardened Iranian nuclear facilities. Chinese military planners have been closely studying every aspect of Hamas' tactical success against American military technology, incorporating lessons learned into Chinese military planning for potential Taiwan invasion scenarios that Beijing now considers significantly more viable following proof that American weapon systems and tactical doctrines can be systematically defeated through asymmetric warfare techniques that cost fractions of what American military systems cost to deploy and maintain. Leaked State Department communications show Chinese military intelligence officers conducted detailed analysis of Israeli tactical failures and American weapons system vulnerabilities demonstrated during Gaza operations, with Chinese Defense Ministry reports concluding that American military technological superiority can be neutralized through swarm tactics, electronic warfare, and tunnel networks that would be far more sophisticated in Chinese controlled territory than anything Hamas was able to construct in Gaza. Russian military advisors who provided technical assistance to Hamas throughout the Gaza operations have been reassigned to Syrian and Iranian military facilities where they are implementing advanced electronic warfare systems and air defense networks, specifically designed to counter American aircraft and missile systems that proved vulnerable to electronic jamming and countermeasures during Gaza operations, creating an integrated American military network from Tehran to Damascus that could prevent American air operations throughout the Middle East. Pentagon war planners are conducting emergency scenario planning for conflicts that were previously considered unlikely because Israeli military capabilities provided deterrent effects that prevented regional adversaries from pursuing aggressive strategies against American interests. But those deterrent effects have been systematically eliminated through the comprehensive degradation of Israeli military effectiveness that will require years to reconstitute and billions of American dollars to fund. The economic implications for American taxpayers are staggering because replacing Israeli military capabilities will require immediate emergency military aid packages totaling over $50 billion in the next 2 years, followed by sustained increases in annual military aid that could exceed $15 billion annually for the foreseeable future, representing the largest increase in American foreign military spending since the Cold War at a time when American domestic infrastructure and social programs are underfunded and American families are struggling with inflation and economic uncertainty. American military force structure will be fundamentally altered because Pentagon planning documents show that maintaining Middle East stability without effective Israeli military capabilities will require deploying an additional 25,000 American troops to permanent bases throughout the region, representing the largest American military deployment since the Iraq War and a direct contradiction of political promises to reduce American military involvement in Middle East conflicts. The strategic implications extend far beyond the Middle East because Chinese and Russian military analysts are sharing detailed intelligence about American weapons system vulnerabilities discovered during Gaza operations with military allies throughout Asia, Africa, and Latin America, creating a global network of adversary forces equipped with specific knowledge of how to defeat American military technology using low-cost asymmetric warfare techniques that any reasonably competent military force can implement with minimal resources and training. North Korean military planners have already incorporated Gaza lessons learned into their defensive preparations for potential American military operations, with intercepted communications showing North Korean military engineers constructing tunnel networks and electronic warfare facilities specifically designed to neutralize American air power and precision weapon systems using techniques proven effective against identical American military technology during Gaza operations. American defense contractor stocks have surged over 30% since classified Pentagon assessments of Gaza operations were leaked to defense industry executives, because military equipment losses and systematic vulnerabilities revealed during the conflict will require comprehensive modernization programs totaling over $200 billion in new weapons development and procurement contracts that will be funded through increased defense spending that American taxpayers will ultimately finance through higher taxes and increased national debt. NATO alliance relationships are being fundamentally restructured because European military planners now question the effectiveness of American military technology and tactical doctrines that failed so comprehensively in Gaza, leading to increased European defense spending and independent weapons development programs that reduce European dependence on American military systems that proved vulnerable to relatively simple countermeasures developed by non-state actors with limited resources and training. The global arms market has been revolutionized because countries that previously purchased expensive American weapons systems are now investing in low-cost asymmetric warfare capabilities that proved more effective than billion-dollar American military technology, creating a fundamental shift in international military procurement that will reduce American defense industry revenues while increasing demand for Chinese and Russian military technology that demonstrated superior cost effectiveness during Gaza operations. American military academies are conducting comprehensive curriculum reviews, because tactical doctrines and strategic assumptions that form the foundation of American military education proved catastrophically wrong when tested against asymmetric warfare techniques that any competent adversary can implement, requiring fundamental changes in how American military officers are trained and prepared for conflicts that will increasingly resemble Gaza operations rather than conventional warfare scenarios that American military planning has traditionally emphasized. Based on classified Pentagon planning documents and intercepted communications between allied intelligence agencies, the next 18 months will bring a cascade of military crises that will force America into direct confrontations with multiple adversaries simultaneously, creating the most dangerous strategic situation since the Cuban Missile Crisis and potentially triggering the largest military mobilization in American history, as the consequences of Israeli military collapse ripple throughout the global security environment. Operation Iron Shield, the Pentagon's classified response plan to Israeli military degradation, calls for immediate deployment of American military assets throughout the Middle East on a scale that will require activating National Guard units and potentially implementing selective military conscription if multiple crisis scenarios develop simultaneously, as Pentagon war games predict, with over 70% probability within the next 2 years. The immediate trigger for American military involvement will likely be Iranian acceleration of nuclear weapons development, because CIA intelligence shows Iran is moving weapons-grade uranium production facilities to deep underground bunkers that Israeli forces can no longer strike effectively, leaving American military forces as the only viable option for preventing Iranian nuclear weapons capability that would fundamentally alter Middle East power balance and threaten American allies throughout the region. Chinese military planning documents obtained through intelligence operations show Beijing has moved up Taiwan invasion timelines based on Gaza lessons learned, with Chinese military analysts concluding that American military intervention in Taiwan would face the same asymmetric warfare challenges that devastated Israeli forces in Gaza, but on a scale that would require American military resources far exceeding what America can sustain while simultaneously responding to Middle East crises triggered by Israeli military weakness. American economic preparation for these conflicts is already underway through classified Federal Reserve communications with major banks regarding emergency war financing mechanisms that could require printing trillions of dollars to fund simultaneous military operations in the Middle East and Pacific regions, creating inflationary pressures that will devastate American family budgets, while funding military operations that most Americans don't understand are directly caused by intelligence failures and strategic miscalculations in Gaza. Domestic American military recruitment has been quietly increased through targeted social media campaigns and enhanced military recruitment incentives that Pentagon planners hope will generate sufficient volunteer military personnel to avoid implementing military conscription. But classified Joint Chiefs communications show draft registration databases have been updated and draft board procedures have been reviewed for potential activation within 6 months if volunteer recruitment targets are not achieved. Defense contractor production schedules have been accelerated through classified government contracts that prioritize weapons systems specifically designed to counter tunnel warfare, electronic jamming, and swarm tactics that proved effective in Gaza, representing a complete restructuring of American weapons development priorities that will cost over $100 billion in additional defense spending over the next 5 years while domestic infrastructure continues deteriorating due to underfunding. American intelligence agencies are conducting emergency security reviews of every major ally relationship because systematic intelligence failures in Gaza revealed that enemy penetration of Allied military communications and planning systems was far more extensive than previously understood, requiring comprehensive security upgrades and counterintelligence operations that will cost billions of dollars and years to implement effectively. The political implications are staggering because American political leadership will be forced to explain to voters why American military involvement in Middle East conflicts is increasing dramatically after decades of promises to reduce American military commitments in the region, while simultaneously requesting the largest defense spending increases in American history to fund military operations that most Americans view as unnecessary foreign entanglements. Congressional budget battles over military spending will dominate American politics because funding Operation Iron Shield and related military expansion programs will require either massive tax increases or unprecedented deficit spending that will burden future generations with debt obligations that could exceed current American national debt within a decade if multiple military crises develop, as Pentagon planning documents predict. American families need to prepare for economic disruption because military conflict escalation will trigger oil price increases of 40 to 60%, supply chain disruptions affecting consumer goods availability, and potential rationing of strategic materials needed for military production, creating domestic hardship that will particularly impact working-class families who cannot afford dramatic increases in energy and food costs. The final call to action for every American watching this video is to subscribe immediately to this channel and share this information with everyone you know, because mainstream media outlets are systematically suppressing information about the strategic disasters that are unfolding and will directly impact every American family over the next 2 years through increased military spending, potential conscription, and economic disruption caused by conflicts that were preventable with competent intelligence analysis and realistic strategic planning. Stay informed through independent sources like this channel, because your government and mainstream media are lying to you about the severity of strategic challenges facing America, and you deserve to know the truth about military disasters that will cost American lives and trillions of American tax dollars while benefiting defense contractors and political leaders who profit from military conflicts that ordinary Americans will pay for with their blood and treasure. The Gaza disaster was just the beginning, and what comes next will reshape America forever. So make sure you're prepared for what's coming by staying informed through sources that tell you the truth instead of the comfortable lies that mainstream media uses to keep you ignorant about the strategic disasters that will define the next decade of American history.